going after Mexicans as rapists and criminals, insulting women, barring Muslims. You know, that reflects a certain strain of belief within the Republican Party.
The Republican Party today has moved very, very far to the right. They are way out of touch with where the American people are. This is a fringe party. It is a fringe party.
All right, back now dissecting everything we heard the last few hours here on MSNBC. Rachel Maddow, Chuck Todd still with me. So, Rachel, on the Democratic side, you interviewed both of these candidates tonight. Here's what jumped out at me from these two interviews. We talk about Donald Trump in these comments. There's so much discussion about media's coverage of Donald Trump. Is it too much? Are they covering him the wrong way? This was really interesting to me because this subject came up. You asked him about Donald Trump's abortion comments. You asked Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton went out of her way in her answer to you to say, this is something the press needs to be covering. They need to be pressing him on this. They need to be getting out there what he says on this. You asked the same thing to Bernie Sanders, and he said, you know, the press should mention this, but this is just a stupid thing Donald Trump says. Basically, he's saying, focus on something else. Two very different views of what the significance of this.
Yeah, and actually it happened chronologically in the reverse order, because I ended up having this interview with Hillary Clinton, and then Donald Trump made his comments. Then I had my interview with Bernie Sanders. Then I went back out into the streets of New York City, found Hillary Clinton again in order to get her comment on Trump. So Bernie Sanders had already told me at that point, when I'd asked him about Trump's comments, he'd said, basically, you know, yes, they're terrible. Here's all the reasons I disagree, but everything Trump says gets too much media coverage. Every stupid thing he says. I said, are you sure this is just a stupid thing he said that the media should be ignoring? And he effectively said, listen, the minimum wage and climate change and these other things should be discussed more. It could be mentioned, but not dwelt on. I put that to Hillary Clinton and said, is he right about that? Are we giving this too much attention? And she absolutely rejected that and had the opposite take. So, I mean, in part, I think it's analysis of whether or not media coverage is the responsible thing to do to Donald Trump, or whether it is what's fueling him and therefore the irresponsible thing. I also think it's a substantive difference between the two of them about whether or not abortion rights is a central issue in this campaign. And I think Bernie Sanders is saying, listen, I'd rather talk about the minimum wage than abortion rights. And Hillary Clinton is saying this is just as central an issue as anything else.
And Chuck, a minute ago, you were talking about Wisconsin on Tuesday, potentially as a turning point in the Republican race if Trump loses, if he loses big there. So if you talk to the Sanders people, they're saying Wisconsin's a turning point in the Democratic race. They're saying Sanders is going to come from behind, going to win, maybe win big there. He's going to get momentum for New York, for Pennsylvania, for some of these bigger states still to come. What do you make of that argument the Sanders campaign is putting out there?
I think he needs to buy a big victory. It can't be just a small victory. Now, he's spending the type of money in Wisconsin. He's outspending her 6-1.
Wow.
That sort of type of figures that he did in New Hampshire where he bought a landslide. I think he kind of needs a landslide to have an impact. Just a 52-48 doesn't do it because it looks too much like Michigan, and then what would happen? But it's a turning point only if it does lead to him pulling an upset in New York. By the way, I just want to, two quick takeaways from Rachel's interviews. Number one, boy, does Hillary Clinton want to run against Donald Trump. You sort of almost, she seems almost enthusiastic about it. It's an odd way of saying it, but she's more animated in a way that I've seen her when contrasting against anybody else. And the second thing is, Sanders is getting cranky about so many process questions, but the problem is, I mean, are his campaign and him on the same page? This happens a lot. Campaign says one thing, Rachel or myself or somebody else presents it to Sanders, and he like throws his aides under the bus. It's sort of it's just a pattern I've noticed with Sanders.
And Rachel, the process questions and his reaction, you jumped out at me too, because in part you're asking him something, it's obviously more than legitimate. This is a guy who's been out there saying, look, the key to my campaign, the key to this revolution is we're going to get record voter turnout. He talks about process as part of his message. Well, there hasn't been record voter turnout on the Democratic side. He talks about 50-state strategy. You pressed him on that and said, why aren't you competing in Mississippi, some of these other states? And he says, well, you know, in a campaign, you have to be practical. You have to make choices, which has always been the argument that political professionals have made against the 50-state strategy.
And now there's the third part of that, which is that his campaign is starting to say, and he's starting to say, well, I may not win with the people, but maybe I can get the pledge, the super delegates to cross over and put it over the top. That's a hard sell.
That's where it has come to. Rachel Maddow, Chuck Todd, thank you both for sticking around. Appreciate that.
What a night.
And it really was. It really was. A lot to talk about
Sleep till
after these last few hours.